think there's a number of reasons why that arises. I think the issue is it's often when we're looking at what good leadership can look like, you might be a bit of a chasm between where I see myself to where I see these people. And so if I'm thinking about how am I going to role model what I see or envisage to be a good leader, I might actually be starting to have some cognitive distortions as to what's the gap in my capacity to lead and to be like these role models compared to where I am today. So it could be a little bit of fear or worry, or it could also be that people don't really understand what leadership is. And too often people will consider leadership to only be that when they have a title, when they have a badge that's placed on them, placed firmly on their lapel, and it tells them who they are, what's their title and what are they responsible for. And until they actually know that and have the list of things that they should do, they might feel, well, I'm not the person who's leading. But in fact, if we actually look at how people are day to day, every day people are walking into their organisations and are leading in different ways. So it could be that they're leading in terms of what they're role modelling in the role that they have, or how they're collaborating with people, or how they're bringing a diverse perspective in what they share. So if people, rather than thinking about why I don't want to lead, consider, well, how am I already leading and what can I bring to it? It might start to mitigate some of the fear that comes with what's this big ask of me and how will I be able to perform and will I meet other people's expectations in addition to perhaps some expectations that I may unfairly set upon myself, given that I'm worried more about what the title says as opposed to what is my capacity to act.
Mm. With these cognitive distortions, is it something that's just happened now when we're adults? Or have these cognitive distortions happened over time? Have we learned from a young age that sometimes leadership might equal pain? Where do we start to have these cognitive distortions?
I think they build over time. I think we're more free and easy as children, and we're probably more liberated in our thinking because we're going through our growth and we're learning what's possible. And as we get older, we start to be, I guess, limited by some of the boundaries, the societal boundaries that are placed in front of us, or some of the assumptions that come with understanding different roles and responsibilities in life. So when we're more free and easy as a child, we're not really as constrained in what we're trying to do. When we lead, we're learning about how we can influence people and how we can play with them in different ways and have them as teams and form different roles and areas of collaboration and influence. As we get older, I think we start to build our own personal biases, our unconscious biases as to what things might look like when they're good or great or awesome or when they're bad and not so comfortable. And so because we're building up these assessments, these unconscious biases, we're starting to hold them and pack together a whole lot of assumptions, which often we won't test. And we'll just live with those assumptions. I'm not good enough, or I won't be the right person, or that person's certainly better than me, therefore they should lead, not me. So it's only once we start to actually hear the stories we're telling ourselves, discover the limitations that we're placing on ourselves because of the assumptions we hold or the biases we hold or maybe the catastrophizing that we're working ourselves through, that we'll be able to step through that and start to pay more attention to what we can do to have that growth mindset as opposed to that fixed or limited mindset that comes in that stance.
Mm. My daughter, she's now 11, and I think she was class captain when she was around about 8. And it was really exciting at the start. And then she turned 9, and I think the children become a little bit more conscious. And then by age 10, and she'd been class captain multiple times. And then she said to me, Dad, she says, I don't want to be the leader anymore. And I said, why don't you want to lead? She said, people don't listen to me. You know, my job, and she wears that badge with pride, my job is to make sure the kids have sat down and they're listening to the teacher. But Dad, they don't follow my instructions. They don't listen. They make noise when the teacher tells them to be quiet. They don't clean their desk properly. And then she said, Dad, I'm quiet. My desk is clean. And then because of their bad behavior, I don't get to go out and play during the break. And I'd seen her go through that, and she'd had enjoyment being a leader. But now the kids kind of ganged up on her a little bit. Oh, you're the teacher's pet. You're always bullying us. She's like, me bullying you? This is just my job,
Yes.
to hold you accountable. And I've seen that. Now, she did get through that and she still wants to be a leader, but she's becoming more aware of those challenges. Not everybody's going to listen to me. When I tell them what to do, they don't do it.
That's interesting. I mean, she sounds gorgeous, I must say, in terms of her view of the world and her roles and how she's played that out. So good on her, though, for having the principles and the integrity that she wants to have in what she perceives leadership to be. And it is something we continuously learn and develop and shape. And when we're leading through our lives, we're looking around and seeing how other people are also leading and taking instances of what might work for them and how might I use some of that in my leadership. Would that work for me? Or would I just be copying something that wouldn't feel quite comfortable and not have the same impact that that person's having? So it's a continuum. I think we have a lifelong of learning and a lifelong of building our leadership skills and being able to draw on experience, which she's got now plenty, having been that class captain for a few times. So she can see, well, what worked? What were those situations or occasions when people did listen? And what did I do differently? Or how did I influence them? Or perhaps talk to them about context and purpose and why? How did that come very naturally to her without her even understanding what she was doing? Sometimes it's just innate. Or maybe she got held up because of what we call FOPO, the fear of people's opinions. So were the kids beginning to view her differently because she was taking a role and was very principled and concerned about following the rules and quite moralistic in that regard? Or was she maybe a bit more risky in letting some of them be shaped and slide? So it's something we learn, but I love the example that you've given. And absolutely we'd see that as people enter the workforce as well. What is it that's been asked of me? What are the expectations that have been placed on the role? What do I understand of those expectations and what's my meaning making around them so that I can feel connected to what my role is? And maybe some people don't have the same sense of meaning making of my role. So they might not view it in the same way as me, and that can cause some dissonance in the way we engage.
I've never heard of FOPO before, and I love it, fear of other people's opinions.
Yeah.
I worked with a leader many years ago, and he was promoted to leadership. He didn't necessarily want to be a leader, but he did want the perks that came with it. And I'd spoken to him and I said, how do you lead your team? And he said, well, I lead them from the back. And I said, that's interesting. I've never heard of that before. How does that work? You're leading from the back. And he kind of explained it. And I said, what's the purpose of doing that? He said, well, Daniel, I've learned that when you stick your neck out around here, stick your neck out around here, your head gets chopped off. So I'm going to let others go first. And I said, is this leadership or management? And we had a laugh and I said, what are some of the leadership challenges that you've had in the past? And he said, when I was in primary school, our cricket team was going to play against another local school. And we knew that they were the best team and they were going to beat us. And the captain of the cricket team refused to play that day because he knew that if they lost, he was going to get the blame. So he was the 12th man on the team. Everybody said, no, I don't want to be the captain. I don't want to be the captain. And the coach said, it's your turn to lead. Lead these people to a victory. And he said, Daniel, there was no way you could beat these people. So I had to do what the coach said. I went out, I played, I was the captain. We lost. Everybody blamed me and I hate it. And he said, it was the guillotine. They cut me off. And he said, that's why today as a leader, I want to try to lead from the back. But unfortunately, he wasn't getting the results that he wanted, but he also didn't have the support. He didn't get the training. He wasn't prepared. There was no grooming. So albeit that he wanted the perks, he didn't really want to lead because of past experience. And so when I hear that FOPO, fear of other people's opinion, I see his face right here saying, I lead from the back.
I think there's a time and place for leading from the back, but I don't think that it's the greatest place to lead from the majority of the time. I mean, when you're leading, I think you need to be conscious of what you're role modeling. And so you might be leading and allowing people and empowering people and enabling them to also be able to affect change and to demonstrate their skills or build opportunities so they can have their growth. You might say, well, is that leading from the back? I'd say you're leading from just slightly next to them. You're still there with them. You're just giving
Mm.
them opportunity. If you're always at the back, there's little role modeling that comes. So people are unable to necessarily understand, well, what is it that I should be doing, and how do I learn from you, and how do I become better because of you? So I'd suggest, yes, at times take a step back to allow people to step forward, to build their skills, to take the opportunity to shine, or even to experiment, or even to make mistakes, and just still be there. So as the leader, you can support them and help them understand what did they learn in that instance, even if it didn't
Mm.
work out. It's
Mm.
it's that, the necessary, I guess, that the hands around you, but you're not there to rescue. You're there to support. So you're not wanting to make every decision for them and always be at the front, pulling them along behind you. You really want to empower them so that they can lead in your absence. You can step away and have things humming and feel confident in the team because they understand what's expected. They understand the purpose for which we're working towards, our common purpose. But you've also been with them and built trust and an understanding of how we work. What's the culture that we've built together? What do we see in each other in terms of the skills, the opportunities, the strengths, the values? How does that all come forward? What are the strengths that we can all draw on from each other to try and have a good outcome? I think that's probably more what he might be wanting to look for rather than always being at the back.
Mm. I've heard over the years many people say, Daniel, I want to become a leader. And they know that it doesn't matter what their personality type is, that all types can lead. They also realize there's a gap. So for the ones who want to lead, what's the transformation that they have to undergo to become a leader?
I think when you're looking for more the formality of leadership as opposed to the day-to-day leadership, I think it's actually first focusing on yourself, becoming much more self-aware, and being able to identify what are the behaviours, the emotions, and the thinking or cognitions that you are having in different instances, and how are those supporting you or otherwise in the choices you're trying to make towards the impact you'd like to have. So your hope would be that people who are leading would like to have a positive leadership impact, and one that's enduring in their absence, one that's motivating and inspiring, particularly when you've left the room. And if you're able to start becoming much more self-aware of, well, what is the impact I have? How am I responding to people? How am I making them feel when they're with me? Are they feeling psychologically safe so they can feel safe to contribute and safe to be included and to challenge me as the status quo? And what am I doing to make space for them? So I'm bringing in diversity of opinions and thoughts beyond mine so that people don't feel that I'm always just wanting to hear my own voice and my own way of looking at the world. And so it's becoming allowing yourself to be open to those around you and to be supported, even though you're the leader, by those around you as much as you're supporting them. So your perspective can be built by opening your cognitive boundaries and allowing so much more in from other people's points of view to help you see things that you otherwise wouldn't have seen, which enhances you as a leader. And when you become
Mm.
so much more self-aware of how you're engaging with people, how you're communicating with people, responding to them, how you're regulating your emotions or not, what's your communication style and so forth, this self-awareness is going to best place you to build your confidence so you feel that you have much more foresight than having to wait for hindsight to say, oh, if only you'd realised what impact you've had. And you'll be faster in responding because you'll know what works for you. You'll know which strengths of yours you can draw on and what your values are. You'll feel much more empowered and confident in your leadership because you'll be able to also draw on your own experience and that of others around you. That's what I think leaders should be looking for, and noticing those moments of discomfort. Leadership's not always going to be comfortable. So if we notice when we're feeling uncomfortable and help ourselves to work through that, to try and discover what is it about this situation that's making me uncomfortable? What can I draw on from myself that might be in support of me? Which parts of me might be in support of me? What would help me? And what would otherwise hinder me that's not going to be in support? So who might I seek support from to also aid me in this instance? I think that's what's going to support you in terms of building those self-coaching muscles to assist yourself day to day with the challenges that come with leadership.
Mm. The psychological safety. I think this is just so important because I've seen groups that feel safe and harmonize And I've seen groups that don't feel safe and there's disharmony. And when I was in Emirates Airline, I would look closely at my leaders. And I always knew the ones who created disharmony by not creating psychological safety. And it was something very common. In our briefing before a flight, they would always tell you, as your senior flight steward, I'm laid back. I'm all for you. I'm not for the company. And if you need my support, I'm going to give you 100% of my support. I'll back you up 100%. And every time I heard that and then observed their behaviors on the aircraft, we saw something different. They were the first ones to be totally on the side of the customer or to be totally on the side of the company and write up a voyage report on the individual and report them back to their leader or their manager. And then in the process, they'd say, well, I have a KPI. I must provide 4 developmental areas for people on this flight today, and you just have to be one of them. And when the person would try to explain themselves, they'd say, you're being defensive, and I'm going to put this in your voyage report. And I'd seen that pattern. And I thought to myself, when I'm a leader, I want to make a different type of impact. So what I would do pre-flight, we had a team of 17,500 and I was a senior flight steward. So I'd get 17 new people to lead every flight. And I would email all of them. Hello, my name's Daniel. I'll be your senior flight steward. Tell me about the position that you want to operate on the flight to Venice this week. And let me see if I can get you your preferred position. So before the flight, I'd introduce myself. And we'd never know who we're getting on a flight. We'll probably lead somebody once and never see them again. And then when they arrived to the briefing room, I was always the first person in there. I'd put on my iPhone, I'd have the music, and I'd set the tone. I'd set the vibe. And then I made them feel comfortable. Then I'd ask them to share their special skill. So everybody introduced themselves and would say, what's your special skill? And I'd be listening to this and figure out, how do I utilize this skill on the aircraft? Then we'd go on the aircraft and we'd do our safety and security checks, and then we'd do another pre-flight briefing. And I'd say to my team, I said, there's 2 things that I want from you. I said, I want you to keep it safe. My priority is your safety. If the captain calls and says, take your seats, sit down immediately. Because if you hurt yourself, then you're useless to everybody else. Secondly, I want you to keep it sexy. Keep smiling for the customers. And whilst we're working together, I'm going to do 2 things. The first thing is I'm going to walk around the aircraft and I'm going to catch you. And they'd lean forward and I'd say, I'm going to catch you doing things right. And they'd laugh and I'd say, you're going to walk around catching us doing things right? I said, absolutely. I'm going to walk around and remind you of all the things that you're doing right. And I'm going to compliment you. So get ready for it. And then secondly, I'm going to walk around, and during this time, there's going to be shortfalls. And the first thing I want to let you know is that I know you're fatigued. I know you're tired. I know you're flying 100 hours per month. You're away from your families and you haven't seen your family and friends for years. You've had back-to-back flights. I know you're tired, so I'm always going to give you the benefit of the doubt. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to tap you on the shoulder and I'm going to remind you of the standard, and I'll let you self-correct. What happened? I'd walk around the aircraft and I'd compliment them. And they would smile. They're like, Daniel, nobody's ever complimented us before. Well, you're doing a good job. You're meeting the standard. And they felt safe. And then when there was a shortfall, I'd tap them on the shoulder and say, hey, your blouse is undone. Your stockings have ripped. Your lipstick smudged up here. And they'd be like, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm like, don't apologize. I know you're tired. We've got 400 customers. Just come back into alignment with the standards. And flight after flight, I'd get messages to my manager. I just flew with Daniel. But it was all about that psychological safety.
That's wonderful.
Letting them succeed and feel good, and letting them have a shortfall and the opportunity to correct it. And out of working with thousands of people, hundreds of flights, never had a problem. Because it was not just physically safe, it was psychological safe. And I agree so strongly with what you've said. They need that psychological safety.
They do. What a lovely example. Thank you for sharing that. It's very
pleasure.
much about kindness in leadership. And that's what I'm hearing you reflect, is how you adopted a stance of kindness in making people feel that they were safe and made people feel that they were heard and seen, included, which is important as well. But just the small things matter when it comes to kindness. So the fact that you demonstrated the care and attention of catching them as they fall, as you said, and letting them know and giving them some positive feedback, that's a huge gesture that people often don't get. And even just in the greeting, when you said you set the tone for the room and you'd emailed them in advance, it's that kindness of the little things that really make a difference in how we relate to people. That's one of my favourite constructs, actually, kindness as a positive psychology construct. So I love how you've told your story and represented that in the way you were leading. It's quite lovely.
How I knew I'd done a good job happened many years after I resigned from the role. I was on a flight from Manchester to Dubai, and I'd just upgraded my ticket. Emirates sent a message, hey, you can upgrade your ticket from economy to business class. It's only a couple of $1,000s. And I thought to myself, I'm worth it. So I upgraded myself. And as I approached the door of the aircraft, I saw one of the leaders, his spine went straight and he looked up and he started to smile and he said, Daniel, welcome. And I said, how do you know my name? He said, do you remember me? I said, your face is very familiar. I know you work with Emirates. And he said to me, you're my first leader. I said, really? He said, the very first flight I did with Emirates, my soupy flight, he said, you're the leader. And he said, I want to be like you. He said, you're the leader who I wanted to be like. He said, I'd never met anybody else like you. But the moment that I saw you lead, I wanted to be like that. And I looked at his badge and what did it say? Senior Flight Steward. And that was one of my goals. It wasn't about getting followers. It was about creating more leaders. And so as a legacy, I'm very proud. And I've got his photo on my phone. I look at it every now and then and go, I did a good job.
Yes.
And I just wanted to feel proud of my time there. And I think if we can create that safe space for them, and I want to hear actually more about positive psychology. What is positive psychology?
Well, positive psychology was introduced by Martin Seligman back in the day, and it's about how we actually look at supporting people in terms of understanding their thinking, their behaviours, their cognitions, their emotions, to be in best support of them. So I have a Masters of Science in Coaching Psychology, which follows and includes the base of positive psychology. It's a very rich evidence base of trials and academic literature, which actually, is written to look at the different constructs that come through. So how we hold ourselves, how we think, how we behave, and the interaction between those. I find it really useful as a coach, as an executive coach, to use that field. For me, I prefer to have a theoretical base in my coaching rather than just a feel-good base of what might make me feel good. So very much my coaching practice is informed by positive psychology, where I can look at different theories and look at different understandings of concepts which can be in support of the individual for whom I'm in service with. And when we look at those different constructs, it's really a very helpful lens to try and help people identify what's happening for them, what's the connections between their behaviours, their emotions, their thinking, and how can we best be in support to help them gather a deeper understanding, an evidence-based understanding, or best on based evidence at that moment, because there's always a build of evidence and there's always certain biases that come with evidence-based depending on where the trial was conducted or the sample size or all sorts of things, but best available evidence to try and help them be of their better self, their best self.
I remember when I took one of my first coaching programs, definitely wasn't evidence-based, and they said, you've got a coach from centre. And I spent the next year trying to figure out what this centre was. And I said to them, what is coach from centre? It's from here. I'm like, well, what is here? So after I became a coach, I said to myself, I need evidence. And I went down the path of utilising scientific assessments to help people what that centre actually was. And I went, oh, centre, Daniel, you're competitive, you're aggressive, you're optimistic, you're definitely not attentive to detail. But I knew who I was, and then I got it. Okay, this is who I am. And I really think that's so important. And it's my bias is that I've been down the path of personal development. However, if you lack emotional intelligence, and some of the best reports say that majority of the population claim to be emotionally intelligent, yet only 10 to 15% are. So if there's no evidence and you're emotionally unavailable, it's going to make it really difficult to make those changes. And I think a lot of people fear this. So what happens? People don't want to be leaders. They want to become leaders. They get support. And then at some stage, the coaching sessions have to come to an end. What happens to these leaders once the coaching session comes to an end? What's next?
Well, I'd say they've been fortunate to have coaching in the first place because not all leaders will have a coach. And so just by that very assumption that they have had coaching and therefore are the leader they are, is probably a smaller percentage of the population than what it could be. So typically when I'm coaching, I'm thinking of the people I'm coaching sitting in quite a privileged position where they're having one-on-one conversations, exploratory conversations to help them discover where they're going or who they could be or the impact they'd like to have. But yeah, quite rightly, the sessions come to an end and then it's about them having to step into the world to face into the challenges with the new insights they have about themselves, with what they've learned through the coaching process they've had with their external coach, or maybe it's group coaching or team coaching. But what I suggest is that we can actually try and increase the equity of access to coaching strategies by building the self-coaching muscles that I spoke about earlier. So building your own self-coaching strategies and practices by learning what it means to arm yourself, to understand, first of all, how do I lead myself to be my best or better self? And once I've done that, I'll be able to be in a much better position to lead as my best self when I'm leading others. And so I've tried to present people with opportunities, whether it's because of logistically they can't find a coach or maybe financially they're unable to afford a coach. How can I be of support to me and fill up my virtual backpack with the strategy so when I leave home each day, I've got my keys and I've got my wallet and off I go, or maybe it's my phone these days, off I go with my virtual backpack strapped on and well adjusted. And I can lean in and pull out those strategies as I lean into a challenge each day to support myself, whether it's a strategy about using my listening skills or how I communicate or how I might engage in feedback and do it responsibly to the people I'm leading. Or maybe it's about how I build trust and empower my team and think about my visibility and the perceptions that are formed in the role that I have, the role modeling that takes place. And around myself, it could be how am I building my self-awareness and building out my support system, my personal board of directors. So who can I have around me who might be able to give me advice or help coach me in the future, or maybe provide me some advocacy to help me find the opportunities to allow me to better myself. So I think there's a nice place to have both external coaching and also self-coaching. And certainly even when you have an external coach, the space in between your appointments, that's on you. It's really important that you take some action. And if you can learn to self-coach in those spaces, you're more likely to affect change. But if we just rock up at our next coaching session and have a lovely conversation with our coach, share how things have been and not do anything in between, very little is going to change. And you're probably investing in coaching that's not really taking you where it needs to. So it's really about us learning the skills of self-coaching. So whether we're with a coach or without a coach, we can start to self-sustain, lift up our access to these practices and build those self-coaching muscles in support of ourselves.